Hey there, it's Nathaniel Grimm, and welcome to the latest episode of Astrology Unbound. This episode took an unexpected turn, and I'm sure many other astrologers and spiritual practitioners can agree with that for their own shows. I was filming this episode yesterday, and halfway through the show, I got a call about the Trump rally and everything that happened there. And it was interesting because I was delaying the recording of this episode in a sort of unusual extent, and suddenly it just kind of hit me that I was missing, obviously, a very key piece of this full moon that's coming up in Capricorn on July 21st. So I'm definitely going to channel the energy of Uranus today, the great awakener and the planet of unexpected changes, and try to sort of forecast and predict what may be coming on July 21st in light of the horrific events at Trump's rally in Pennsylvania. Just before I get into today's topic, be sure to check out my Substack newsletter for an in-depth breakdown of my predictions for the globe, my step-by-step manifestation guides for each full moon, intention setting recommendations for new moons, educational content, and a lot more. So let's just dive right into the subject matter, which again has been in flux in the last 24 hours since I first attempted to film this episode. So when I was starting off filming this episode, I was thinking about all the potential meanings of the Capricorn full moon. And this full moon has a density and an intensity to it and sort of a foreboding nature, primarily because it's conjunct Pluto. And Pluto is that planet that deals with transformation and metaphorical death and rebirth. And at the 29th degree of Capricorn, it does have this feeling, which I described in my original take of this episode as that Jenga set where there's another, like the next piece you're pulling out may sort of topple the entire Jenga set. So there was a sense that I was getting in my first sort of energy reading of this full moon that, there is some type of stability, foundation that suddenly is destabilizing and, really fracturing. So, I think it's, definitely still in keeping with the Mars-Uranus conjunction. Even by July 21st, I think that conjunction is still rippling out. And so let's just kind of explain, though, before I get into the full moon and how you can prepare. And of course, I will give explanations for how you can prepare on a personal level. But let's start off with the collective energy right now. So how are we crescendoing up to this full moon? We are really going to be living in the aftermath of the Mars-Uranus conjunction. And even though, like I described in last week's episode, the Mars-Uranus conjunction occurs regularly. I mean, it's about every 2 years or so that we get this conjunction. And so, oftentimes those conjunctions, because Uranus does not play by any kind of rule book, sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes everything changes overnight. But I did have a sense that this one would be different and this one would be more chaotic because, it's in that Capricorn decan of Taurus, and the decans are 10-degree subdivisions of the zodiac signs. And when you're in a Capricorn decan, you are speaking to governments, institutions, organizations, and I think even sort of prominent figures. And it's closely aligned with Algol, and that's the fixed star that has ties to Medusa. If you read into the mythology of Medusa, it's obviously very ominous and foreboding. And, we just witnessed generally with Mars and Uranus conjunct, just suddenly the tables are flipped or the tables are turned. And just when you think something is holding itself together, which is what Taurus wants, just when you think that something is concrete and stable and secure, it's suddenly unfastened and untethered. And it's just everything just falls out or spills out or seeps through your hands. Those are the feelings of Mars-Uranus. But there is that explosive energy too of Mars-Uranus where it's sort of busting out of its confines. So, as myself and other astrologers talked about in the weeks and months leading up to, this conjunction, it is occurring very close to Donald Trump's midheaven, and the midheaven is your public standing, public status, and your career. And so, with that, and the square to his Mars, and the Sun on his anti-vertex, and his Saturn in the 12th house, that was bound to be a day that where there was some kind of shock points for him in his career. And, obviously it was a very tragic moment. And I just want to take a moment to pray for everyone who's affected by that and the lives lost. Obviously, it's definitely a very serious and tragic moment. It's something that, again, as far as making predictions goes in astrology, it's oftentimes it's naturally very complex because you have so many moving parts and variables, and there's the collective implications. There's other people involved with their own charts, and so making predictions for anyone in the public eye can be difficult. But this one, I think for most astrologers, was pretty obvious that there would be something, unsettling about the sort of July 15th timeframe. And I spoke about it 8 months ago, back in November of 2023, that there was going to be this inflection point, this catalyst in mid-July. And then January 2nd in my newsletter, I talked about July 15th. I pinned that down as like potentially one of the defining moments of 2024. And then again in June when I was, so it's something that also when it comes to making specific predictions, when it comes to like energies like this, I actually try to shy away from like going too deep into those types of predictions when they seem very ominous, because I don't really want to contribute to any kind of like fearful dialogue in the public. And I also don't want to, in a lot of ways, like I don't want to like quote unquote cast spells by talking about something that can have very like grave implications. So for that reason, I tried my best to kind of like speak around it by just saying, okay, July 15th, 13th, or July 15th and the approximate days around it, like it does look very, shocking. And it definitely, the way I phrased it in January was like it could like dethrone Trump as the party's leader. That was sort of like a euphemistic way of talking about it. And I'm sure other astrologers take a similar approach to me. So you probably know other astrologers, or you've heard other astrologers talk about their prediction for it. Many astrologers made this call. And I really feel like it was, again, it was like pretty much like there were so many variables lining up at the same time. I think it was pretty clear that there was some kind of, again, kind of disturbing moment in the middle of July. And so this full moon is happening in the aftermath of that, and this conjunction, though, is still rippling out throughout the upcoming week. So don't think that, 13th or today as I'm filming the 14th is just like the tunnel. I mean, we're still in the tunnel. And so between now and really the full moon, July 21st, anything and everything is subject to change. And that does drill down to your personal life and at that altitude of just like the personal experience, the internal experience. And that goes especially for people who have major placements in that last decan of the fixed signs. So Taurus, obviously, but also Scorpio and Leo and Aquarius. You may be feeling the most overwhelmed right now. Obviously, everyone is feeling somewhat overwhelmed, like they don't know what's coming next. But if you have like a lot of fixed sign placements in those degrees of like, let's say 20 to 29 degrees, to be safe, then yeah, don't overschedule yourself this week. And, there's obviously, like I talked about in the weeks leading up to this, like there are, like it's just like this frenetic energy that you may want to stay away from. It's like a rapid river that, okay, fine, maybe I don't want to swim in that right now. And so if you're feeling highly sensitive to everything at this time, then, again, take some breaks, meditate, take a bath, whatever you have to do there. But just, again, slowing down is really important because Mars and Uranus has this excitability to it where it really doesn't know how to slow down, especially when there's a catalyst and when there's that shock point. It's like suddenly the domino effect plays out at such a rapid pace, it's like really hard to keep up with. And so the 13th, with that tragedy at Trump's rally, like that is the first domino to fall in this conjunction. And so we have so now there's the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee on July 15th. And I think that, it is precarious. It is a very precarious moment with that conjunction still building. And we get a Scorpio moon in the transits here this week. We also have, Mercury entering its pre-shadow phase before a retrograde And actually, the moon is in Scorpio as I'm talking right now, actually. But if we go quickly into July 15th here, the first day of the convention, that's when the conjunction is exact. And that's when there's the Scorpio moon opposing Mars-Uranus all the way through, I guess, the 16th of July. So there's really, like, the energy is not subsiding at all this week. And then it's like every time I want to say, hey, guys, like there's some reason to be hopeful about this week, I just can't find it. So like, I'm obviously not trying to monger fear. Like, this is just objective research. And I talked about this on my other channels, like on Instagram and TikTok. Like, after the full moon, July 21st, which we'll talk about today, yeah, things might calm down for a bit. But I think, like I said on my podcast, I think 2 weeks ago, I still think May and June were probably the best months overall in 2024. So like in the collective, I think there's going to be a lot more, there's going to continue to be a lot of disturbances and still some pockets of calm. Like I think July 22nd through maybe August 3rd, it's actually not so bad. But then like August 4th, we get Mercury retrograde. We have Mars closely aligned with Aldebaran, which is like a fixed star that has like also kind of ominous implications. So now, again, I'm not saying this to drain you of any hope. I think that it's just like really important to be objective about what's coming, and so that you can calibrate your lifestyle according to that. Like ebb and flow with the energies. Like the energies were meant to be this way. Like even if you were an astrologer in the Middle Ages and you were trying to forecast like what would 2024 feel like, they would say, well, okay, like sure enough, like if they had Uranus, I guess, discovered. Like they could look at Mars-Uranus, let's say 100 years ago, fine. They could look at Uranus and say, okay, there is that Mars-Uranus conjunction aligned with Algol. Like that does look like a really treacherous time. And it's, but clearly the collective is going through these convulsions to create these new sort of alchemical reactions, which will only sort of start to make sense maybe many years from now, right? Like astrology is working on these timescales that are, in a lot of cases, depending on the planet, some of these timescales are even like go beyond our lifetimes. Like if you think about Pluto, like no one is going to see an entire Pluto cycle in their lifetimes. So we have chosen to incarnate in this reality while Pluto is transitioning out of Capricorn and into Aquarius, which is Uranus's home turf. And so despite the chaos of right now and despite the overwhelming nature of it, I think that, over the next few years, even if it's tumultuous for many more years, which again, like being candid, I think it will be, we are leading to a place where like we can feel like, our ideas are heard and our voices are heard. And, it's like the individual is actually contributing in a much more obvious way to the improvement of like collective well-being. Like that's what we hope will happen with Pluto in Aquarius. And so that age, and it doesn't have to be the literal age of Aquarius, which by the way is still probably about 100 years out in terms of its like the earnest age of Aquarius, like the actual full manifestation of that age of Aquarius is still, I think, a little bit of ways off, but we're seeing flashes of it because these ages overlap. It's like we are meant to help the collective usher itself into an era and a phase which lasts for over 2,000 years, ideally, where, we are much more collaborative, tapped into higher frequencies, where individuation is possible and where we don't have to feel so pressured to assimilate into a monolithic culture. So yeah, just like keep the broader context in mind this week. Like these are changes that, these are rapid changes, and there's going to be changes throughout the next week, really. But it's really putting us on, I think, a different timeline that will help us actually, use this Pluto and Aquarius energy to its fullest. But again, we're going through kind of a gateway right now and a portal with the full moon in Capricorn, July 21st. So let's just dive into that full moon. So as always, a full moon can be many things for you in your lived experience. It could be a culmination of something you set intentions around 2 weeks earlier or approximately 6 months earlier during a new moon in Capricorn. And because Pluto has been in Capricorn off and on really for the last 16 years, with that full moon at the 29th final degree of Capricorn, it could kind of wrap up karmic lessons that you've been meant to learn for the past 16 years. So for other people, it's a major release point. You're letting things go. In the Capricorn area of your chart, you're letting go of Capricornian things, like maybe a job or a responsibility you no longer identify with. But with Pluto closely conjunct, you could be releasing certain thought patterns, complexes, coping mechanisms, addictions, obsessions that, were impeding your progress. And you could really dive into, and like with your shadow work during that full moon, you could really like unearth some just absolutely revelatory information about your own psyche and yourself. And you may suddenly realize that you've been in certain patterns for maybe years, right? Or maybe your whole life that have been locking you in place. Like, oh, why have I been attracting the same partner over and over and getting into these toxic codependencies? You might be able to figure out why. Like, oh, it's because, those partners are mirroring some unhealed energies within my family. Or why am I not advancing in this job? Or why is this job not actually soothing my soul or serving my soul's evolution? Oh, it's because, I choose to work in stagnant organizations under many tiers of managers because I have issues with my father. Like, I'm just making this up, but like whatever that is, it's like Pluto allows for deep psychoanalysis. And the psychoanalysis can reap amazing rewards, actually, which is just like the brutally honest truth about something that you're finally owning up to or just realizing or happening upon. And you're suddenly like, okay, I'm going to be honest with myself that, yeah, like this pattern needs to go. I need to allow this tower moment to happen because it's really the breakdown before the breakthrough. And the foundations that I've built or clung to are no longer serving, again, my plutonic sort of transformation journey. So by letting those structures go or letting those commitments go, which can be Capricorn, now I can finally be free and evolve and play a big role during the Pluto and Aquarius era, which is really still imminent. I don't think we're really fully in it yet. We're seeing the flashes of it. But Pluto still has to retrograde back to this exact 29th degree of Capricorn from September to November of this year. So after the elections in the United States in 2024, after those elections, that is when we are fully immersed and swimming in that Pluto and Aquarius era, which is where we can all empower ourselves to become the water bearer, to realize that, okay, yes, we need to fill up our own cups. We need to channel the Leo within ourselves to make sure that we feel validated and we know what our passions are and we're expressing our ego and our vitality in a healthy way. But as part of that, we are also spreading water to the collective through our gifts and our knowledge, and we're using that water to connect with others energetically, and we're developing a more holistic understanding of what it is to be human and also a spiritual being having a human experience. Like I think Aquarius, like Pluto and Aquarius can, really augment our understanding of like why we're here. And maybe even just as a quick tangent, like our place in the universe relative to other sentient beings. So, there are some intergalactic discoveries that could occur while Pluto's in Aquarius. But anyways, to really drill back into the time and place we're in, like, I think that this could be also for you. It's like either this is the culmination of all of your hard work, which maybe we could really go all the way back to 2008 when Pluto entered Aquarius. Maybe that's like the hard work you've been doing started then, where you have been shedding foundations and empowering yourself from within and finding an internal resilience that no external foundation can provide. Or maybe you've been stubborn because Pluto and Capricorn actually has a very stubborn energy to me. Maybe you've been stubbornly clinging to certain patterns and modes of wielding power in an insecure way. And it's like suddenly, okay, well, I am not actually going to, I'm not going to, like, this is a false power. This is a temporary power, or this is a, fraudulent type of power. Like maybe you feel powerful. You have felt powerful through certain means, or maybe you have felt like a relationship or a job or a health situation was like unbreakable. It was like, totally set, because Pluto likes to be set in its ways. This full moon can be like that wrecking ball finally breaking through the final layer of concrete in this monolithic structure and being like, no, like that structure that you think you've built and that you think you're benefiting from, like that is the extension of so many years of conditioning through your childhood and through the society in which you're living in. Like, I think we can hack into our conditioning at this time because, I think a great analogy for Capricorn is the analogy of like a really hot young startup that gets acquired by a massive conglomerate. And I've actually lived through two cycles of that in my own life. Like back when I was in my 20s in New York, it was so strange how similar the stories were. But I joined, I joined two companies about exactly, in both cases, about 3 months before they were acquired, and not knowing that they were about to be acquired. So I would join these companies that had a lot of promise, a lot of character, a lot of unique qualities and traits, and then suddenly they would get swallowed up by this massive, like either Fortune 500 or, again, like well-capitalized company. And while the company would give the startup resources and capital all of a sudden and staffing to do different things and to delegate responsibilities more soundly and to reduce the workload, it's like those startups lost their character, arguably, and because of the process of assimilation. And that's what Capricorn really is. And it's not like Capricorn is an inherently negative sign, but just that is the shadow side of Capricorn, is like when you really sink into that order and that structure, you do lose some of your identity and authenticity. And, sometimes we are too motivated by the external pressure to meet certain expectations, or we kind of succumb to certain types of self-consciousness. And you can apply that to anything. You could say, I would rather be an actor, but I should probably become a banker because that's what my father wants for me. That's a Capricornian thought. Or again, I want to, I want to go out there and express myself, candidly, authentically, but I'm worried about what the crowd may think. But also Capricorn is meeting expectations in a positive way. And I give this example whenever I teach an astrology course, but it's like when I teach an astrology course, it's like the class is a Capricornian, like the classroom and the class and the students are sort of applying pressure to me basically because they have expectations, right? So it's like, okay, if you sign up for an astrology course with me, it's like you expect it to meet a certain standard that you hold. And because you are witnessing the class, it's like, I'm going to fulfill my obligation to be the teacher and to guide you through the astrological principles. And so Capricorn is not a bad, no sign is inherently negative or, toxic or damaging. It's just that, Capricorn is that sea goat climbing to the summit, reaching the summit based on and doing so through harsh conditions because it feels that intrinsic motivation to keep climbing to the top, but it also feels pressure to get to the top from outside forces. Now, I don't think that's inherently bad, like I said. But I think where it veers into the shadow side of Capricorn is, again, if you completely sacrifice your individuality for the sake of adhering and conforming to social customs and norms. So it is kind of an evaluation, this full moon, of what type of excellence are you striving towards? How are you striving towards that excellence, and why? So again, what is your version of excellence? Is it, I want to be the best doctor in the world? I mean, that's obviously that sounds pretty great. You are trying to heal people and so on. But why are you striving for that excellence? Oh, because my parents really wanted me to do that. Okay, let's pause there, right, and evaluate that. So that would be more problematic. But despite, again, if you are if you already understand why you're climbing towards that summit, and it's really emanating from and drawing from this intrinsic motivation rather than this extrinsic motivation, then I think that this full moon could really mark that, again, that accomplishment. And this is maybe when you realize that goal, and then you're ready to move on to something else. But just know that if you're kind of feeling lost right now and you're I don't know what's going to happen for me on this full moon. I don't even know what I want to do in 5 days from now. Then, allow this full moon to just be revelatory for you, because a full moon is not just a manifestation, a culmination. A full moon can just be this aha moment. And let's just take that as an opportunity to explain a full moon, which I guess, which I haven't done on this episode. And I think it's very easy and tempting for astrologers to kind of like skip over some of the basic, concepts, just because we do cover full moons every month. But, the full moon, it occurs approximately 2 weeks after a new moon, right? And it's when the sun and moon are on opposite sides of the zodiac. So the sun represents the eternal spirit and life force, while the moon is the body itself. It's our rhythms, it's our patterns, it's our hormonal and emotional patterns, it's our digestion. But the moon is really that ephemeral transient vessel that receives the light. And it is the incarnation of our spiritual flame and the manifestation on the physical plane of our abstract thoughts. So symbolically, the full moon is impregnated with the sun's light to the fullest at that time. And it's heightening our intuitions and emotions, which tunes us into the patterns and synchronicities everywhere. And it can, because of that, lead you along like a certain pathway that's really, synchronistic. And then suddenly something that was dormant in your subconscious is reawakened. And propelled by those sensitivities, like, we can take inspired action. So that inspired action is basically acting in the present moment when everything comes to a head and you're like fully immersed in the present tense with all of your senses and extrasensory perceptions firing. Like, you can take action in the present moment, and that is a type of beginning. So even though many astrologers will talk about a full moon as strictly an ending and maybe a manifestation and a release point, which it can be, if you actually talk to like human beings about their experience with full moons, regardless of whether or not they abide by astrology, it's like most people will tell you that they just feel like their antennas are tapped in, like they feel raw, they feel overwhelmed in a way, but it's also like it is very much a carpe diem moment. It's a time for action, I think, in a lot of ways. For many people, and I've experienced this in my own life during full moons. A lot of my full moon experiences have actually been course changes, especially lunar eclipses, actually. Now, I'm not saying that you should do it that way, though. So if you're trying to really elevate your game, you want to be really ebbing and flowing with the lunation cycle such that you are planting new seeds on the new moon. Yes, absolutely. You're setting intentions. And by the full moon, you're really manifesting those intentions into your reality. Like 100%, I will vouch and advocate for that. But I'm saying, realistically, there will be lunation cycles where you don't resonate with your intentions anymore, where new information has come to light. And based on that information, it's like, yeah, if you have to make a change, then make the change. And ultimately, it is the climax of a cycle. So just to, kind of and to summarize like what this full moon is about, like, it can be the culmination, again, of the hard work that you've put into something over the last 2 weeks, 6 months, or even 16 years. And again, the 16-year transit of Pluto in Capricorn has more of a collective implication oftentimes, but I still think that symbolically, it can be the culmination of that 16-year journey where you are working with power differently. You are considering how you've assimilated into the society and whether or not that was a legitimate exercise. You can break down your conditioning right now. You can psychoanalyze it, break it down, reconfigure it, such that you're no longer self-conscious, such that you don't take on responsibilities that you don't actually want, such that you can play a powerful role in the next 20 years while Pluto is in Aquarius. But it can also be the realization of core lessons you were meant to learn over the past 16 years. So it's like you finally get confirmation maybe that, oh yeah, this is the pattern I have to break in my relationships. This tower moment and this tower moment added up to something there's a wisdom that I've gained from those tower moments and those moments of collapse. And that wisdom will carry me forward into the next evolutionary cycle. But the full moon can also expose foundations or patterns that you're holding on to too tightly that need to be released. And if that's you, and it's like, and that will be many people, where it's like suddenly, again, wow, my relationships have been fraudulent for so long because of XYZ. You still have 4 months to rectify that and recalibrate. Like, if you feel like you haven't learned the lesson, Pluto's going to retrograde back to that 29th degree until it will finally go back into Aquarius November 19th. So you basically have from now until November 19th to really re-empower yourself, to recode, like to kind of like change the coding of your subconscious mind so that you get out of those patterns and you're on more of a growth trajectory. So I think that is, again, the power behind Pluto. Pluto is the unvarnished truth. It's ripping the veneer off something. It's like, I can't hide anymore from XYZ about myself, and so I'm going to face it. I'm going to do the shadow work. Now, to be Saturnian about it, so for some of you, you may realize that there are responsibilities that you haven't taken on, that you've neglected, that you actually do need to fulfill. So some of you may suddenly, I don't know, maybe you're becoming a parent all of a sudden. You're like, wow, like I really have to dedicate time to this entirely new lifestyle to be a parent. Or, like you have a new job and it's like, well, you obviously, with Capricorn, we have to learn about delayed gratification and like putting in the hours and putting in the effort. So on this full moon, maybe you realize I can't just work 9 to 5. I have to work an extra 3 hours, every day for the next couple months. But that's going to make your presentation better. That's going to make your project outcome much more successful. And then maybe you get promoted. So I'm not going to pretend like it's either, everything pays off for you, or you can let something go or start fresh. Like for some of you, it's like, Capricorn reminds us that we have obligations. And again, ask yourself though, like, are those obligations legitimate? Am I making assumptions based on my parental and societal conditioning that I need to pursue those responsibilities? Like, maybe not. But of course, there is a baseline of obligations that we have. And I would say also with the chart ruler Saturn retrograde in Pisces, I think for a lot of us, it's about the fantasy bubble bursting. Because Pisces is very fantastical. So with Saturn retrograde in Pisces, you may be saying, wow, the fantasy was cozy and it was blissful, but now I realize the fantasy was a prison. And Pluto conjunct the full moon is like, yeah, you're not going to be able to like nestle in that, like that cozy fantasy anymore. We're going to rip you out of that. So like if you were getting a high from a certain relationship or a certain lifestyle or a certain habit, that's all gone. Like Pluto is like, no, but do you see now, and Capricorn really, I guess, is like, do you see now the effects of that sort of delusion you've been buying into? So like, for example, let's say for the last 5-6 years, you've been, not really caring at all about your health regimen, your diet. And maybe this is that moment where it's like, wow, I have to get my health in order. Or maybe it's the reverse, where it's like, oh, you've traded sweets for salads for 5-6 years. And now you're dealing with like a health crisis, but you're able to kind of like navigate it because of those positive health choices you've made for the past 5 years. And I'm just using that as an example. But like with Capricorn, we are seeing at the 29th degree the compounding effects of everything we've been doing. Not only the past 2 weeks or 6 months, but 16 years, I would argue. So it's kind of that feeling of like you're building an IKEA like couch or table, and it's like the first screw is in wrong. And now that you've put it all together, you realize that because you made that misstep at the beginning, you may have to disassemble it and start over. But it's not like, it's not a disaster. It doesn't mean that it's like an irreparable situation. You can reassemble it and build it back stronger. That's what Pluto does. It breaks things down, builds back stronger. So again, like don't view this full moon as defeatist. Don't view this full moon as just fate being handed down. It's like the more honest you are with yourself, the more powerful changes you can institute over the next few months while Pluto retrogrades back. So, but let's also talk about the collective energies. And before I do that, though, I also just want to remind you, my Substack newsletter will have horoscopes and predictions and guidelines for manifesting during this full moon according to your sun, moon, and rising sign. That's coming out in a few days. You want to check that out. But yeah, I mean, the elephant in the room is obviously Trump's rally and everything that happened there, and really both presidential candidates. And let's even loop in RFK Jr. Because all of them are going through pivotal transits right now. I talked about Trump at the beginning. This was something that myself and other astrologers predicted in so many words, whether we were speaking euphemistically, like in my case. Again, I had a sense that it would play out that way, just given the fact that Algol was involved, and Algol is associated with Medusa. So it's like if you look up the story of Medusa, you'll realize that it was like pretty on point. And Mars rules the head. Trump has Mars on the ascendant. So, I even think about the signals that I was getting in my own life in the days leading up to it. Like, I remember seeing images like through like paintings and symbols like that. This would all like that was trending that way. But again, as an astrologer and an energy worker who has a public platform, I think it's like very irresponsible to, get so like sort of to make these bold statements about like very specific things that have, again, grave implications. I just have a problem with that. I don't like to, really, again, go like for many reasons. I don't really like to go there because even again, just the nature of these platforms. Like we all, as energy workers, you have to be very careful with what you say in a public forum. But again, myself and other astrologers, we all kind of saw some version of that event in our mind's eye. It's just a question of whether or not we decide to like phrase it that way exactly. But if you go back to my Substack, my YouTube, my interview that I did with the Leo King last November, like it's all the receipts are there. And so given that happened, like what's coming next? And again, I'll just like post this disclaimer. I am only reading the energies as I see them. Like it is just an intuition at this time. And I also will be, careful about how I phrase things. It's just, again, it's just my style. Like I don't want to, I have Mars retrograde in Gemini in the 12th house. Like that is not, it's just not really wise for me to overshare, overstate, or be too explicit in things of this nature. But let's look at his chart. Let's look at Trump's chart. So yeah, looking at his chart, we do have the Mars-Uranus conjunction recently, conjunct his midheaven. We witnessed what happened there, and now we also have the Mars, like Uranus conjunction is still squaring his Mars and eventually his ascendant through the convention. So there's still going to be quite a bit of chaos during that time. Now, this could just be chaos in the sense of like there's a lot of scrambling to change, the way that the security is protecting him or something like that. So it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's intensifying from what we already witnessed. But it's interesting that the sun yesterday was on his anti-vertex, which is a very fateful point in the chart. Things can kind of happen to us without any sense of control. And the sun was also very close to Saturn in his 12th house. And so using that as a guide, I'm kind of seeing a couple things for him over the next couple months. And I'm going to dive much deeper into this. For the sake of the podcast, I'm going to give you more of a brief overview of what I see over the next couple months. But just tapping into the energy of his chart. I think when Mars goes into Gemini, July 20th through September 4th, that could be, the discourse could get quite ugly. Like there could be a lot of, arguments within his campaign. There could be, but I don't think it's inherently negative for him. Mars, and once Mars reaches Uranus, in his chart, like which I think is in mid-August, like that feels a little weird to me. So like around mid-August, maybe there is some type of flouting of the rules, or there's some kind of accusation that he violated some kind of like terms of like the campaign or the election. I don't know exactly what that would be, but there's some kind of like conflict with authorities. and a feeling of, with Mercury retrograde on his ascendant, a feeling of, I don't know, just maybe, well, with Mars on Uranus too, it does feel like around August 15th, there's something a little bit unexpected going on there, where things are just moving really quickly, very suddenly. Yeah, so I mean, that could be very significant. I mean, that could be another, like, sort of a catalyst in a way. And then I also think that by early September, when Uranus stations retrograde, that's going to station retrograde almost in a square to his Mars. So that, yet again, will create just a lot of unpredictability around Trump. But then we do have the Mars going into Cancer in the 12th house of hidden enemies. And around the lunar eclipse in Pisces, September 17th, that's when I feel a little bit more, uneasy about the transits, because Mars will be on Mercury in the 12th, which actually rules his north node of destiny, Uranus, or it disposits, I should say. It is the dispositor of his sun. His north node is Uranus and Gemini in the 11th. Mars on Mercury in the 12th. Like, I mean, that's around the time of his sentencing. His sentencing is actually September 18th, but even around September 17th, maybe there is just a lot of stress around the sentencing, a lot of bickering about it, debating about it, but, that does look like a bit of a precarious time for him yet again. But I really feel like when Mars hits the 22nd degree of Cancer, which is where the sun was on July 13th during the rally, when Mars hits that same 22nd degree, that degree point, the Capricorn degree, right? Like the 22nd degree. So in astrology, the 22nd degree is very foreboding. It's a Capricorn and Saturn degree, and it can be destructive. So, with Mars on his anti-vertex near his Saturn, while the moon is in Aries, almost an Aries full moon, October 16th, conjunct Chiron, I feel the most uneasy about October 16th and 17th of this year for Trump. Like that sort of time frame, it's just like Mars is in a very difficult spot for him by transit. It is reactivating the sun's position on July 13th during the rally. And the full moon in Aries, like Trump would be very sensitive to a transit of the moon in Aries because, he has Mars on his ascendant. And so he has a very Martian chart, and Mars rules, the head, and he also is a Leo rising, and Leo rules the heart. So we have a lot of themes here around circulation, the heart, the head. So maybe this is actually a little bit more of a health issue because the South Node is on his Neptune in Libra. Libra rules the kidneys. Maybe there's some kind of processing issue in the blood or something, or maybe, again, there's some sort of head-related issue. So, just the sort of convergence of all of these transits at once makes me feel the most cautious about October 16th and 17th, which again is an Aries full moon, conjunct Chiron. And that's kind of the culmination of the solar eclipse we had in Aries. I believe that was April 8th. And it's we're still in that eclipse corridor right now. The eclipses take about 6 months to fully percolate. So going back to April 8th, that was exactly conjunct Chiron in Aries. And Aries can be the leaders, people who are, really leading maybe a political party, for example, but people who are in positions of leadership. And Aries is that masculine energy. So Trump has a very Martian chart in a lot of ways just because of that Mars ascendant conjunction. So everything that happened on July 13th is part of that eclipse story. And if I'm looking at the eclipse right now from April 8th, Mars is conjunct Saturn. Wow, okay, so I've just noticed that. So Mars conjunct Saturn, the transit's April 8th. Mars conjunct Trump Saturn. Mars will conjoin his Saturn around October 17th, 18th during that Aries full moon, which, by the way, will be pretty much conjunct the position of Mercury retrograde on April 8th. So, and at that time, by the way, that solar eclipse, the South Node was on his Chiron. And if I even go into his progress chart, The progress chart, let me actually just quickly load that for you. I want to make sure, because I remember looking at it before this episode and having a lot of thoughts about it, but I want to make sure I'm accurately depicting it. So right now, his progress Mars is in Libra, conjunct his Chiron. So that already is a little bit more, injury prone. His progress moon is in Scorpio, the sign of transformation. And around October, his progress moon is going to be squaring his Pluto, again, of transformation. So that sort of adds to the significance of October. But, the other major trend, though, that's working in his favor is that he does have Jupiter at that time conjunct his north node, and it will actually station retrograde pretty much on his north node. So Jupiter confers blessings, good luck, abundance. So it is completely possible that Trump will manage these transits just fine, and that he would end up actually becoming the president. And by the way, I just want to make this really clear, because there's been a lot of, for every astrologer and everyone who's commenting on these events, there's a lot of questions around which candidate do you support? I just want to make this clear. I don't support either candidate. I am not apolitical, but I don't buy into the whole idea of a two-party system. I think it actually violates basic tenets of spirituality, to allow polarization, to feed polarization yourself, I think creates a schism within you. It doesn't allow for coherence. It's not transcendent by any means. So I think obviously there are considerations to be made about is there a means to an end to vote for a certain person to make sure that the more disastrous candidate doesn't get into office. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm just making a statement that I do not support either candidates for reasons that I don't feel like I have to get into. I think it's just it's a delicate balancing act as an astrologer to cover political content, because everything you say can be scrutinized, right? Every word may be taken one way or the other, and this isn't even a reaction to the response to my political videos. It's just something that I have seen other astrologers do, and I'm fully in line with what they're doing, how they're approaching it, I should say. I'm in the same camp probably as most other astrologers, which is that I think our modern day political theater is ridiculous. Go back to George Washington's parting address. He warned everybody about the two-party system, how that would create, the two-party system would create the conditions where the politicians are no longer serving the people. They're just trying to seek vengeance on each other, and they're trying to gain power over one another, which, by the way, is Pluto. And that's part of this full moon too, by the way, is realizing, wow, the entire system is fraudulent. But anyways, overall, I'm seeing a lot of difficult and challenging transits for Trump, really through early 2025, because Mars will retrograde in Cancer in his 12th house, squaring Chiron at some point in the transits. And I believe even maybe squaring his Chiron by the time it stations direct again, although I have to confirm that really quick. But, this could, with Mars on his ascendant, Trump has the type of chart where anything fated that happens to him that is damaging to him or difficult for him happens very suddenly, because that's the energy of Mars. Mars is very sudden. So with a chart like his, it sort of speaks to an event like yesterday, or maybe a sudden cardiac episode, or some kind of clot or something like that. That's kind of how his chart operates. But so overall, I do feel like there's a lot of a lot of difficult transits there. But I will be diving deeper into that in the future. This podcast is not meant to be exhaustive regarding his transits, but just looking at, again, the position of Mars, even through February 2025, it is squaring his Chiron and squaring the transiting Chiron. So just quickly speaking to Biden's chart, I've talked about Biden's health issues. I think Biden has a lot of health issues that are going to be announced maybe July 15th, the day of this episode, or maybe when Mars goes into Gemini and conjoins his Saturn or something like that. So I want to pull up his chart really quick just to, again, have that in front of me. But, Biden has Mars and Uranus transiting his 6th house of health, of physical health. So it's not, like, and I've talked about this. I predicted that he would have some kind of health issue like 2 months ago, like during this stretch of time. And, he admitted to ABC News, I think it was ABC, that he was feeling sick leading up to the debate. So that kind of checks. Yeah, and then Mars will hit his Saturn, I believe, around August 4th. And so on Aldebaran. So August 4th, with that Leo new moon, not conjunct his Pluto, but close enough to, or squaring his Mars, by the way. I think that Leo new moon around August 4th, it probably doesn't bode that well for Biden either. I mean, I do think that, there could be some health issues afoot here. So, just, I don't know, a lot of astrologers are saying that Biden will be fine, that he'll win. I'd have to, again, dive deeper into this, but I don't really feel that way. I feel like Biden still has some, again, difficulties ahead. Now, RFK Jr., I think RFK Jr. actually has a role to play in this election. RFK Jr. is a 27-degree Capricorn sun, which is the position of the U.S. Pluto. He has a lot of Capricorn in the later degrees. He has the moon, in my opinion, I think his moon is conjunct Sirius. Which would make him a star seed. So when we think about the energy of Sirius, it's like changes overnight. Like overnight changes. Someone could become an overnight success. Like Kurt Cobain had his moon conjunct Sirius, and so he was like suddenly, in the span of like a month, selling out arenas when Nevermind, that album came out. So like with someone like RFK Jr., like he could rise to prominence. I'm not saying that it's a guarantee because, again, the way the two-party system is set up, like having a third-party candidate, like, it's like very, very much an uphill battle. But I do think his transits tell me that, yeah, there's a major role that he may play, and he may be. It's actually completely possible that he could be the president. But it really depends on what shakes out with Trump and Biden. And again, I will get into RFK Jr.'s chart much more deeply in the future, especially in my newsletter. And I had a couple episodes ago on my podcast, I think it was 2 episodes ago, talking about the Cancer new moon, which, by the way, is on his natal moon, RFK Jr. We are living in a time where, that is reminiscent of 1968, the last time, Chiron and the North Node were both in Aries during the Democratic Convention. Unfortunately, we had the tragedy of RFK in his assassination. So, and I'm not saying that would happen for RFK Jr., but I'm saying like what happened to Trump on July 13th is reminiscent of that that Chiron North Node conjunction in Aries, which I talked about 2 weeks earlier. So, so far, the eclipse on April 8th seems to be setting a really, a really foreboding tone in the collective. And the last thing I want to say, by the way, about this full moon in Capricorn, I know I'm jumping around to a lot of subjects, but just, in the spirit of just kind of flowing through it, the full moon conjunct Pluto and Capricorn could be like very, very shocking news, like unsettling secrets that are coming into the collective, like seeping into the collective regarding a powerful figure, a certain governing body, an institution, a company. And, Trump has ties to Epstein. And when I was first filming this episode, take 1 yesterday, that was actually the through line for the episode. I was talking a lot about how when Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008, that's when Epstein reduced his sentence and cut a deal with the courts in Florida or whatever. And, because of that deal that was brokered, like Epstein, like everything that he was doing, like the nefarious activities, because of that trial, the outcome, they were basically, those nefarious activities continued. And so, like, Pluto's passage through the last degree of Capricorn over the next 4 months will dredge up some themes from when Pluto was at 0 degrees of Capricorn in 2008. So it could be like financial, like something tied to the Great Recession. I mean, probably not at this point, but potentially the markets will be roiling or whatever. But I think it has a lot to do with revelations around celebrities and politicians' ties to Epstein. And so I think that information could come out around July 21st about Trump's ties to Epstein or someone else's ties to Epstein. And obviously that's going to throw another wrench in the political race. So all in all, to summarize this podcast episode, I think that, the road will be bumpy for a while. I know I talked about on my other channels that, there's some reprieve. Maybe after the full moon in Capricorn, there might be. But at the same time, Mars will square Mercury right around the time it's like stationing retrograde. And I don't necessarily, I find it pretty hard to believe that the energies would fully calm down between now and really the spring of 2025. But then we get the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, then we eventually get the next one in 2026, and we get all this fire and air. Like, I still stand by my prediction that there's probably a world war on the horizon in April 2026. I still feel like that's in the cards. It's not guaranteed. Remember, we are intuitive workers. We are working off of the energy that we're feeling. We're just tapping into energies. It doesn't always translate to absolutes, but, I am concerned. I do think in 2032, like, everything's going to look great. I know that 2032 is a long time from now, but it's really not in the greater span of the universe. So just remember that we have an inherent bias just by being humans. Like, we process time. Time is all relative, and we process it very differently than, what the clockmaker or the watchmaker actually designed it for. So, it's really the blink of an eye between now and 2032. And I'm not saying that you yourself would not have any success until then, or that you would be, experiencing nothing but carnage. But the Saturn-Uranus conjunction at 28 Gemini near the fixed star Betelgeuse looks, I think, pretty interesting. Like, that is the more, the more holistic sort of, I don't know, concrete. I guess it's more of like a concrete manifestation of like maybe that age of Aquarius, or, the collective. Like, people in the collective have just a much better understanding of energetics and energy, and they're working with it more consciously. So that, quote unquote, I'm not saying it's a utopia, but that better world is coming probably in 2032. But along the way, there will continue to be some shocks and changes there. And so right now we are dealing with, again, a catalytic moment, and but it is creating these pretty insane chemical reactions that I think will, again, all make sense in the long run. So anyways, before I head out, just another reminder to subscribe to my Substack newsletter and to give me a follow on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and more. And again, watch out for those manifestation guides I'll be putting on my Substack. But in the meantime, just, again, don't overstimulate yourself. You don't have to watch everything that's going on in the news this week. I mean, there's just going to be so much discourse. It will be overwhelming, but really apply the approach that I talked about during this podcast to the full moon of like being honest with yourself, even brutally honest. Hacking into your subconscious patterns to the extent that you can, and rewiring that subconscious so that you're not holding on to foundations that no longer serve your evolution, and you are letting go inevitably of something and accepting what the lesson was over the last 16 years, accepting that lesson, and also working to rebalance your karma, because Capricorn is really, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, which is the Lord of karma. So that's what we're all trying to do here. We're trying to like really detach ourselves from certain energies in the society, in the collective, in our own conditioning that have been holding us back and keeping us locked in place and creating distortions and further imbalances, extreme imbalances within our karma, because Pluto is extremes. Letting that go, letting that, like flushing that out, washing that away, and really in the wake of that, building up an even firmer foundation and a resilience that comes from within. So thank you so much. I'm Evan Nathaniel Grimm, and I will see you next week.